Welcome to the Medical Collective, your go-to podcast where medicine meets real life. I'm Dr. Keisha Davis, a pathologist, personal trainer, and your host. I will be joined by a vibrant team of doctors who are not just healthcare professionals, but artists, fitness enthusiasts, and advocates for change. Each episode, we dive deep into the world of medicine, from untold stories of the healthcare industry to the latest in medical advancements. We're here to bring your insights, answer your burning questions, and explore the art and science of healing. So let's get started and step into the world of the Medical Collective. Welcome, everybody, to the Medical Collective. We are your source for news information with a diverse group of physicians and healthcare professionals. Today, we are talking about something that I think is the root of some of the issues we're having, and that's vaccine hesitancy. As a Gen Xer, this was not a thing that we dealt with. I'm sure, Dr. Atoosa, it's not something that we ever questioned, and we were afforded the ability to make sure we were covered. And now we're dealing with it where our children are not so lucky. So we're going to talk about it, starting really with the origins of it. Is this something that's been going on for a long time, Dr. Atoosa, or is this newfound?
It's at least 25 years. In the late 90s and early 2000s, a British physician named Andrew Wakefield was being paid underhanded by certain resources and companies that were trying to silence their competitors. And he published a paper that of questionable evidence and origin. And while the paper talked about gut abnormalities in endoscopies on some children, at the end of the paper, without anything supporting it within the paper, he concluded that the MMR vaccine increase the chances for autism. And he started this worldwide panic about the MMR vaccine. That article, within a few years, was retracted from The Lancet, this British journal which published it, which is a very prestigious medical journal. And Andrew Wakefield lost his license for his unethical actions. And yet, his spurious claims, his claims that had no evidence, continued.
So, Dr. Atoosa, how did this get into the journal? Especially can you explain to people, when things get to a journal, they have to go through a lot of stringent protocols, and you also peer review?
You do have to have peer review, which is somebody reads the paper to make sure that the evidence matches. And a good peer reviewer will actually look into the references and look into the actual data. Some journals will allow some authors to name their reviewers. And I think that's what happened in this case. And he named people that would just, give it a tacit approval and not look deeply. And that's how it got into The Lancet. And The Lancet actually got a lot of backlash. It had been a respected journal of medicine worldwide for over 50 years. And it definitely got a lot of backlash and a lot of criticism for allowing that paper to be published. And not that other, questionable papers haven't been published in other journals too, but this would be on the level of the New England Journal of Medicine or some very famous journal. Lancet was a very famous journal, and it allowed this incredibly poor non-scientific publication to go through, which led to a worldwide panic. And then people who had a vested interest in blaming someone for their child's autism hung on to this and publicized it. And some celebrities jumped onto the bandwagon, and it became this huge public controversy and led to some of the vaccine hesitancy that we see over the past 20 years, and the backlash against not just the MMR vaccine, but against vaccination in general.
So this was really the match that started this whole fire. And then I believe with a lot of things that social media has basically just took it. Because something that happens that could be very small and minor, once it gets to social media and it grows and becomes viral, you're in trouble, especially when it comes to science.
And this unfortunately coincided with the rise of Facebook and Facebook groups that were,
I don't even go on Facebook that much anymore.
Yeah, not many people do anymore except much older generations. But still, at that time, it was sort of young people using it, and also people who were up and coming and at the forefront of technology. And we know through studies that have been done that misinformation spreads 10 times faster on social media than true information. So that's why this contagion of false information about vaccination just spread. And even though Wakefield was disgraced, lost his medical license, even left the UK, he found a foothold among the anti-vaccine movement and was venerated as a hero. He still lives in Austin, Texas, right here in our home state, Dr. Keisha. And he gets upwards of $100,000 for speaker engagements to address, literally thousands of people and talk to them about how vaccines are terrible.
Dr. Atoosa, we're doing the wrong thing. If he's getting that much for talking nonsense.
I know. And we're growing our podcast little by little,
right?
a few hundred people at a time. And we're doing this for free because we want scientific information out there at the public, right? But I think that, our podcast is free. You don't have to pay for it. But I think that shows how something can spread and be latched onto by a movement and then be very difficult to combat. And I think that's where we find ourselves now. And then all of this misinformation and disinformation spread online, which was made worse during the pandemic.
Let's talk about that. Because when we're talking about vaccine hesitancy, and we can include for everybody, I know people like to use the term anti-vaxxer, but I don't want to make something heated or a negative connotation on a group of people at all. But during the pandemic, I think the vaccine hesitancy became even stronger, and then scientists and healthcare professionals became looped into it. So now you don't trust immunizations. Now you don't even trust doctors and scientists.
Exactly. And I also would venture to say that I was shocked by the level of vaccine hesitancy that spread into healthcare providers during the pandemic. Remember when surgeons and some nurse practitioners got onto media and were arguing against vaccines as well. And the rest of us were like, wait, you're healthcare providers. You should be pro-vaccine, but it was not universal. And that's the first time I had ever seen that. Like, I had seen all kinds of vaccine hesitancy. And most parents that are vaccine hesitant, they've just heard a lot of fear mongering and they don't know what to believe. But I felt like these healthcare providers, they had the evidence at their disposal, but they were choosing to believe the fear rather than the evidence of the reality. And I also think that the vaccine hesitant people were even more vulnerable during the pandemic because there was a lot of confusion at the beginning about the reality of COVID, how serious it would be, how fast it would spread, and then about how the vaccine was developed. I think it was kept kind of secret at first, and then when it was revealed, people felt that there was a lack of transparency, even though it was actually the most transparent vaccine development movement ever, because most of the time vaccines are guarded secrets until they're released, right? So we knew as healthcare providers that we were seeing a glimpse of vaccine development in real time, and things were being shared in real time in a way that has never happened. Not with the hepatitis A vaccine or the varicella vaccine, which is chickenpox. Any of the things that in our lifetime were developed, they were all kept super secret until they were actually released. The Ebola vaccine, which was released in 2015, no one even knew that was happening. It was literally like a government secret and was being developed at a military installation until it was like, hey, we have an Ebola vaccine and we're going to vaccinate all our troops that we're sending to West Africa. And we didn't know. So I think even though there was a lot of transparency, people were vulnerable because they had felt like they didn't know what was going on during the early phases of COVID. And they were vulnerable to that fear and that misinformation that was being spread. And the people who had a vested interest in spreading that misinformation really took advantage of social media during COVID and amplified their voices to spread more misinformation. And that's why even people who should have the evidence and should have the technical and the critical thinking skills to understand the reality fell prey to vaccine hesitancy.
Yeah. You mentioned one thing about some of the physicians, and it's just like an apple. I buy bags of apples, y'all, the organic ones from Costco, and you're always going to have a bad apple. I want people to think about that as far as healthcare. Unfortunately, you have some that are not thinking like the consensus. And so, unfortunately, if you are a patient and you have that physician, don't think that that is the end all and that is what you need to be following. Please, please, please. But you also mentioned something about vulnerable groups. One vulnerable group during the end of the pandemic, do you remember when we had monkeypox outbreak? You did not see vaccine hesitancy with them. So it is not global and it is not spread nationwide the same way in groups. And what happened with that group is they did not have vaccine hesitancy. And I want people to know what happened with monkeypox when they followed all of the recommendations.
They did. And the community that felt that they were at risk for monkeypox, and they first of all, I think they had a above average level of education within that community, but there weren't like more healthcare providers or whatever. They were educating themselves about the news. And I think part of it is that they felt that they were already a persecuted minority and that now a disease was coming for them and they better use whatever tools at their disposal. And so grassroots, person to person, they made a pact to all get vaccinated. And I remember a friend of mine telling me that he rounded up 6 of his friends in New York, and they all went to a vaccine center, like a health department vaccination center, and all got the monkeypox vaccine at the same day. Made a social media post about it, and their thousands of followers then, started coming to get vaccinated. So I think there is hope to say that you can spread pro-vaccine correct information too, if you have a community that is very plugged in and very open to hearing evidence.
So that brings me to you as a pediatrician about parents, because the main issue we're having now with measles and spread of some diseases is the parents, unfortunately, are going to make the decision for the children. They can't. And so how do you get that communication across to parents when it's vaccine hesitancy? And for everybody that doesn't know, Dr. Atoosa actually deals with integrative medicine. So she actually has a community of people that don't necessarily believe in vaccines.
Yeah, I feel like this is my walk because I do holistic and integrative medicine, and my practice is actually called holistic allergy and immunology. So I get a lot of parents who want a natural approach, and about half of my patient population don't vaccinate as a whole, or they had an issue one time, like a vaccine reaction, which was very normal, but in their own minds was blown out of proportion to something super dangerous. And so that led to them never vaccinating anyone again, like not that child or any other children. So there's vaccine hesitancy of different varieties that I see. One is that the one that parents have been prey to the prevailing fear-mongering and misinformation that's in the media. And so when their children were born, they didn't know whether or not to vaccinate, and they thought that the protective thing was to not vaccinate them because they relied on herd immunity, which means that if a large number of the population is vaccinated, the likelihood of an outbreak of that illness is smaller. Well, we saw how herd immunity went so far down in measles that we got an outbreak, right? And this also happened with polio a couple of years ago in upstate New York, where there was enough loss of herd immunity that a polio outbreak happened. And so wherever we have a drop in vaccine numbers, herd immunity can be compromised, and then you're relying on something that doesn't exist. You thought it existed, but it doesn't, because many parents, just like you, didn't vaccinate. So the herd immunity has fallen, and now our population is at risk. And I have a friend he's an evolutionary biologist, and vaccine research and game theory are his specialties. And what he found in many focus groups and parent interviews that he did was that parents severely underestimate risk of the disease and severely overestimate the risk of vaccine injury. And that's where the mistakes are made in decision-making by the parents. And part of that is that they haven't really seen the disease up close and personal. Even now that measles has thousands of cases, over 1,000 cases.
And mostly in Texas.
Mostly in Texas. How many of the parents that I talk to have ever seen a case of measles? Almost zero, right? They don't remember measles because we started vaccinating for measles decades ago. They don't remember, they didn't have measles. They don't remember anyone having measles. They don't remember watching a child die of measles. They don't remember knowing anyone who died of measles. So they vastly underestimate the risk. And then they hear all these horror stories that are supposedly being publicized about vaccine injury, and they feel like they've seen that, even though they really haven't. And even though maybe what they saw was that their child got a bump on their leg when they got a vaccine and that bump swelled up, they think of that as this drastic, horrible vaccine injury when it wasn't, and it resolved and the child is fine. They blow that out of proportion into something huge. So I think it's a misestimation of risk. And what the research in evolutionary game theory shows is that humans are terrible at assessing risk. We're awful at it. And that's why we need evidence. We can't go on our gut feeling to assess risk. That's not how it works. So that's one variety. And the other variety is those who are blowing a small reaction out of proportion into a big life-threatening reaction. And then there are people who feel like vaccines aren't natural for some reason. And their whole thing is that they only want natural things. But I also don't see those people turning down Ozempic or other medications, which also are not natural. So they don't see the dissonance in their way of thinking. They don't see how, they're driving a car, which isn't natural. They're doing all things that aren't natural. But on this point, they want to be only natural. And they don't realize how very natural vaccination is. It's actually the most natural way to introduce the immune system to address rehearsal of fighting that disease. And in a way, it's been going on for millennia. A small dose of something can make you immune to a bigger dose later. We've been doing some version of vaccination since the 1400s. So it's not unnatural at all. And the only thing modern science has brought to vaccination is more safety.
Very good insight. And what do you think is the main demographic of a person that's like vaccine hesitant? Like, what are you seeing with parents?
Honestly, it is across the board. I know it's across the board. It's people of color. It's people of every ethnicity. It's people. It's white people. It's people with a lot of education, like master's degree level education. It's people with no education. I wish I could say there was one demographic, but there isn't, because if we knew, we could target that demographic with our education, but it's not, and they can exist anywhere. And I had a doctor friend of mine recently try to talk me out of vaccinating, like myself and other people in my family. And I was like, what happened to you? Because that's not how he was in med school. So something happened to him along the way, right? So I wish I knew what the key was, because then I could say, oh, this is how we target it. But again, my friend, the evolutionary biologist, his name is Chris Bach, by the way, if anyone's curious to look up his work. But he found out that the thing that does sway people is their friend group. So who you're hanging out with is the greatest indicator of whether you will accept vaccination or not. So if a lot of anti or hesitant people are in your friend group, you're more likely to become vaccine hesitant than if you are with a lot of very pro-science, pro-evidence, pro-vaccine people. And I recently talked to a patient family, which are, they were like, we're vaccinators. That's literally, they told me that. They were like, I know a lot of people come to your practice that are not, but we are vaccinators. Because I was like, well, has he had all his vaccinations? And she was like, yeah, we are vaccinators. We vaccinate for everything. And he had his vaccines last year and he's gotten all of them and all of that. And it was just, and I was like, wow, like that's not the family. I wouldn't have known. Like I wouldn't have pegged it. There is no way to predict. But I kind of asked the mom, I was like, why are you so pro-vaccine? And she was like, well, my mom was a nurse in the 1980s. And she told me all these horror stories when she would come home from the hospital. And that made, of the children that weren't vaccinated and were in the ICU, she was an ICU nurse in the 1980s. And I heard of kids dying of the flu and dying of whooping cough. And this made a big impression of me when I was 9 years old. And I was like, oh, she had a formative experience in her childhood about vaccines and protection, or lack of vaccines and death. And so that made a big difference to her. And she was like, I know people that don't vaccinate, and I know a lot of people that vaccinate, but I know the truth. Like, that's how she brought it up. And it was this formative experience in her childhood. So I don't think there's just one key, but I think that some people will turn the corner in that fear. Like, if they're hesitating, they will turn the corner if the right influence gives them the right information at the right time, which is why I keep having these conversations with every single one of my parents in my practice. I keep trying to get them to vaccinate their kids, keep telling them about the measles epidemic, telling them about the risk of death and brain injury from measles, keep asking them every time if they've thought about what I said and if they will now vaccinate their 2-year-old. So I don't stop, because I don't know which one of those conversations will be the turning point conversation.
So everybody, Dr. Atoosa has patients. And one of the things that happened to me in med school is when I wanted to be a pediatrician, everybody, is when I saw the parents and the difficulty having those conversations is when I knew it wasn't for me. So thank you for that patience, Dr. Atoosa, because we don't all have it. You know, with this hesitancy, we're seeing a decline, like the numbers are showing, a decline even in the MMR vaccination, even despite these measles rates that we're seeing, a decline in flu, HPV vaccination, which for everybody prevents cervical cancer, penile cancer, head and neck cancer, many cancers. And it's also, leading to a society where I'm really afraid if we have another outbreak, will we be ready? Because we're not taking for seriousness the immunizations and the medicines that we have at hand. We're taking it for granted. And so I hope that this herd of people that are vaccine hesitant, I hope we can get a herd of vaccine people that are pro-vaccination, and that herd can grow too, because I really do believe there's positivity in numbers.
And that you don't have to be a doctor to talk to your friends about why vaccines are protecting your children, and that you won't know if your influence will make a difference in saving a child's life. So if you know the truth about vaccines and how they protect children, talking to your friends who are vaccine hesitant can be a form of community service and education.
Very true. You talked about before herd immunity, and for everybody, there is an episode where we talked about vaccine preventable illnesses. You can listen to that, and I will put a link to it so you can go and listen to that before this one. But you talked about herd immunity before. And one thing is that I remember we used to have chickenpox parties when I was growing up. So I have 3 siblings, everybody. And so we all got it. My mom was like, we were all together. So we all got chickenpox around the same time. But for some illnesses, the purpose of a vaccine is to have what is a not live for most of them. It's not live. So you're getting exposed to it so you can get ready. Like you said, you can get primed. But when you get sick, you don't have that affordability. So if that live virus that you're now sick with wants to wreak havoc, or your immune system's not ready, you could have long-term consequences or die from it. So I think that's really, really important. So when people say, let's do herd immunity, Dr. Atoosa, I don't think they understand that we can't expect to have that for everything, especially even COVID-19 when we had the Delta variant.
Yes. And herd immunity, it doesn't really work if there's a high mortality and a high illness rate with something.
Which we had with COVID-19.
Which we had with COVID. And then also, they tried that in a couple of countries, Sweden, and literally lost 5% of their elderly population in under 6 months, because herd immunity meant half of those people, a lot of those people dying. Like, it really meant a lot of those elderly people dying. So I don't think herd immunity works that way But with vaccine herd immunity, if enough people are vaccinated, the disease can't spread through the population as well. And that's how you get the herd immunity. So with measles, we know that you have almost a 95% protection rate. So of the people that have gotten measles during this outbreak, there were only 2 people who were fully vaccinated, I think, that got a significant case of measles, and to the point where they were tested to see if they had measles. And I think there was a failure of vaccination in those cases. And failures can happen if someone's sick when they receive the vaccine, or their immune system is just impaired in some other way, either nutritionally, like they don't have enough nutrition because they're undernourished, they don't build good, they didn't get enough protein in their diet. Some children, that's a problem because they only, like, they're so picky as toddlers, they only eat like a specific, like, tater tots, and they have like extremely picky diets, right? And so they're not getting the protein they need to build vaccination. So it's not unheard of that there is a failure for immunization, but almost 95 to 98% of people that get vaccinated for measles develop an immunity to the point where they will never get the disease. And if they get the disease, it will be mild. But mostly they will not get the disease. So I think that is the thing. And measles, if you get it as a disease, you will also never get it again. But the problem is that we don't know who that gets that disease will get a brain melting, subsclerosing encephalitis. We don't know which of those kids will die of pneumonia. We don't know which of those kids will die of an overwhelming viral inflammatory syndrome. So it's almost impossible to predict whether natural infection herd immunity will kill someone or not. And so that's not a good way to do it. The best way to do it is vaccination. And I said this during the episode that we did on the vaccine preventable diseases, but almost all the vaccines we developed are because the disease is not well treated, even with all the technology that we have. And we cannot
right, because we don't have one for the common cold, right?
We don't. We don't, unfortunately, and not for lack of trying, but some viruses escape our capacity to make vaccines for them. And HIV has been one of those. We've been trying for 50 years to make an HIV vaccine, or not quite 50, but 45. Like, since HIV was discovered in the early 80s, we've been trying to make a vaccine. We've failed. But we have vaccines to some of the viruses I thought we would never figure out, like dengue. Now there's a vaccine to dengue virus, which is a terrible, causes hemorrhagic fever. It's an awful virus from the tropics. And I thought we would never have a vaccine, and we have, because when I did vaccine research myself 20 years ago, I was like, oh my God, this is going to be such a hard virus to develop a vaccine to because of its structure. But they figured it out. So I think eventually we'll crack that nut too with HIV, and we'll hopefully figure out a way to even make some cold virus vaccines like echovirus. And I think the elderly would benefit from that because some of them die of the common cold, right? So I think there's possibilities down the line, but right now we don't have certain ones because we haven't been able to develop them, or we only concentrate on the severe ones.
Hello, listeners. We want to remind you that you can catch The Medical Collective on all your favorite podcast platforms. That includes Apple, Spotify, and YouTube. Be sure to hit that subscribe button so that you never miss an episode. We're also on Libsyn, and you can find us on all social media platforms as The Medical Collective. Do you have thoughts or questions? Please don't hesitate to reach out. We love hearing from you. Now let's get back to the conversation. I'm thinking, Dr. Atoosa, do you have any stories of patients that because of their vaccine hesitancy, maybe it wasn't the best outcome, or because they did listen to your advice that they did take immunizations and probably just a great outcome from it?
Yeah. Well, the story that really haunts me is there was a 15-year-old soccer player, an athlete, in Houston. And his pediatrician had encouraged the family to get flu vaccinations for several years in a row. But they had, one time, mom had gotten the flu vaccine and had like a flu-like illness after it. And so that had led her to believe that flu vaccines cause more illness than they protect. And she was told that they don't really work anyway. So she didn't end up vaccinating any of her kids to the flu. So this 15-year-old soccer player, caught the flu. At first, he had just a high fever and flu-like symptoms, but over the course of 5 days, became comatose and was not revivable and was taken to the emergency room, was admitted to the intensive care unit. And over the course of the next 72 hours, every system in his body shut down from a post-viral multi-system inflammatory failure. So the flu virus replicated in his body to the point where he died of all his systems failing. His brain function was next to nothing. His heart was failing. His kidneys failed. Every system in his body failed. And he was taken off life support several days later. And just looking at that family and them realizing that if they had just vaccinated him, he might have had a mild flu-like illness, but not this severe death experience, that was heartbreaking. And it is why when people say, oh, I don't take the flu vaccine, I talk to them about why. And I talk to them about how you don't know if your body is going to be the one to react that way. You don't know if your child's body is going to be the one to react that way, and that the flu is not a benign illness. Yes, we have medications for the flu, and you can start someone on those medications if you test them early enough. But the fact of the matter is that if you're one of the people vulnerable to that, it can be devastating. And that's true of other vaccine-preventable diseases too. I've also seen babies die of pertussis because their parents did not give them the DTaP vaccine or the whooping cough vaccine. So all of that, has led me to understand how protective vaccines are and how I would wish for my patients, just like I would wish for my own child, that protection. But I have a great story as well, one where the family came in early COVID. So I was seeing patients in the hospital and the clinic during the pandemic. And I had a family that I saw 3 of their sons and their daughter for well checks, well child checks during that time. They had teenage sons and a preteen daughter. And the sons were all athletes and really, really healthy. And I talked to them about the COVID vaccine and when it came out and its protectiveness and the fact that I was the first one lined up to get it in our hospital and how I believed in its process. And they were like, well, it's so new and it's so untested. And they had gotten other vaccines for their children. Their children had the other vaccines. They had, except for HPV, I think they'd had all the vaccines. So they listened, and they were very polite. And I, without judgment, just said, I know there's just a lot of scary, confusing information and misinformation out there. And, but this is the true information. And please protect your children. So they came back a few months later for something else entirely. And there was actually a cricket in one of their children's ear, and I removed the cricket. And
wait, real cricket?
Yes, and I had pierced his eardrum, a poor thing. Anyway, so even though that was not a vaccine visit, I asked, did you, after we removed the cricket and we gave him pain control and we referred him to ENT to take a look at his ear, nose, and throat doctors to take a look at his eardrum and everything. On the way out, I actually asked the mom, hey, did you think about what we talked about with respect to the COVID vaccine? And she said, we did. And we were offered it at our work. So my husband and I got the vaccine. And I was like, oh, well, that's awesome. So now can we vaccinate the kids? And she was like, no, I'm still really hesitant to vaccinate the kids. And I was like, but why would you protect yourself and not your kids? I didn't understand, right? And she was like, well, we just thought if something bad happens because of the vaccine, we want us to experience it. And I was like, no, you're fine, right? And she was like, yeah, we had fever for a few days, but we're fine. And I'm like, okay, so that should actually convince you to vaccinate your kids. And then the 14-year-old boy turned around and he was like, Mom, I want the COVID vaccine. Can I have the COVID vaccine? I want it. And he was like, I want to be protected. And I don't want to miss sports and school. And also, I heard that this kid got COVID and something happened to his heart and now he can't play football. And I don't want that to happen to me because people didn't realize at first that there were cardiac complications of COVID. They only talked about the cardiac complications of the vaccine, of one of the vaccines, but actually COVID has cardiac complications and many teens had terrible COVID cardiac complications. So he asked for the vaccine and his mom was like, okay, well, we'll talk about it. And they left, right? But the next time they came in for one of the other kids, for a completely unrelated thing, again, it was like an injury to his knee and I was ordering an x-ray and whatever. I was like, so your son asked for a COVID vaccine. Have you thought about that? And she was like, yeah, actually all the kids ganged up on us at family dinner last week, and they really all want the vaccine. And I was like, well, why don't you let us vaccinate them? And she was like, well, my daughter is only 11, so she doesn't qualify. Because at first, it was 12 and above, and then later it was expanded to the younger age groups. But I was like, well, at least vaccinate your teenagers. And she was like, okay, well, we'll think about it. But sure enough, they came in 2 weeks later and they vaccinated all the boys. And those kids were so proud. They were like, we listened to you, Dr. Kourosh, and we talked our parents into it. Like, it was this heartwarming thing where I was talking to the mom, but the kids were listening. And the kids were not only listening, but they were understanding the risk to themselves and understanding that they wanted protection, right? And he was like, now I'm like, so one of the boys was like, now I feel really protected. Like, I'm not going to miss school and I'm not going to miss sports because I got this vaccine. And if I get COVID, it's going to be really mild. So he really understood it. Like, he understood that it wasn't going to necessarily prevent COVID entirely, but that he wouldn't get a severe case and he wouldn't get a heart defect from it. And so he really understood. And then at the daughter's 12-year-old well child check, she got all her vaccines. And then I was able to have the HPV conversation with them. So, and talk to them about why HPV would protect not only her 12-year-old self, but her 50-year-old self from cervical cancer. And I don't know if they eventually vaccinated all their kids for HPV, but I have a feeling that all those kids will get it when they turn 18. Like, even if their parents don't allow them to get vaccinated while they're teenagers, they'll get all their vaccines when they're older. And now HPV vaccine is indicated up to age 45. So they have a lot of time to protect themselves. But that was not only a win for vaccinating a family of 6, who needed protection during the pandemic, but also for me, it was a win because it felt like the children, the teens, were exercising these critical thinking skills above and beyond the fear. And they saw the expediency, the real effectiveness of getting vaccinated. And it probably helped that they'd been vaccinated for a lot of other things and realized that vaccines were just part of healthcare. And it might have been a harder battle if they had never been vaccinated for anything. But I still saw that as a win. And it motivates me. That story motivates me to keep talking about it.
It's a masterclass, everyone. It truly is a masterclass. Hesitancy and distrust did not happen overnight. And even in my demographic, it did not happen overnight. So one thing we can learn, and we learned this during COVID-19 when we were speaking to people on Clubhouse, is you have to lead with trust. Sometimes you have to talk about other things. You cannot throw it all at somebody at one time. And you cannot lead with bashing them and making them feel bad. And you cannot expect them to change their mind completely. So you led with what was important. And you also noticed that we've got to listen to our children. I've been learning that a lot. We've got to listen to our children. We have lost critical thinking, and they still have those skills. And they listened to you. They listened to their parents, and then they made an informed decision. And it did not happen overnight, but it happened.
And one thing that the mom said to me when she was vaccinating all 3 boys, which really pulled at my heartstrings, is that you've taken care of our kids with such love, and we trust you. So when they said, we trust you, so they were like, maybe we don't trust pharma, and maybe we don't trust all the information online, but we trust you. And so that's why my advice to other healthcare providers, the pediatricians out there, the nurse practitioners doing primary care, the family medicine docs who are facing this vaccine hesitancy, and we are the front lines, right? My advice to you is don't give up on these vaccine hesitant families. The trust you build through the love and the compassion that you show to them ultimately probably means more than any data that you present. And the way that you care for their family will sway them more than anything else. So ultimately, she said, the boys really wanted these vaccines, and we didn't want to keep them from getting them. We are developing them as, we want them to be people who make their own decisions in life. So she said that about her guys, her boys, right? But she was like, also, we trust you. And I think that really showed me that every time I lovingly and respectfully brought it up, that deepened her trust. Every time she didn't do it and I didn't judge her or tell her that she was, putting her kids at deep risk, or like every time that I didn't return that with condescension or disappointment, I was reinforcing that trust. And that is what you need to build, because ultimately, if they believe that you care for them and that you hold their best interests at heart, they're more likely to listen to you than even if you're the world's expert on something.
That is the most important thing. And that actually was my next question, Dr. Atoosa, is that at the end of the day, we can throw all the facts and data that we have at somebody, but they're wanting to know, can they trust you? And over time, and I think that's how we build trust, one step at a time, and starting with the doctor-patient relationship. Does the patient trust you? Over time, are they going to trust science? Are they going to trust immunizations? Well, let's get to the first step, which is trust with the doctor and patient, which is trust with at least one immunization, which is now trust with the children. And now the parent sees that the doctor and patient have this trust, and now they're even trusting you more. And then they realize, you know what? Maybe what she said about immunizations is not wrong. So it's a process, and I agree that. But are there any other tools you think that pediatricians and primary care providers can use?
Yes, both the American Academy of Pediatrics and the state pediatric societies, like Texas Pediatric Society, they have motivational interviewing tools, like talking to families about measles, a vaccination, and talking about vaccines. And then there's a nonprofit organization called the Immunization Partnership. And besides motivational interviewing tools, like what questions to ask and scripts to lead with, they actually have videos, like real-time videos of dramatic reenactments of a pediatrician talking to a parent and the conversation and how it could unfold. And those I found very helpful, even though I was a seasoned vaccine advocate and I was a seasoned pediatrician. When I found those tools like 12 years ago, they have really helped me, and they're still up. So you can look up the Immunization Partnership.
Okay, and I'll get that from you so we can put that in the show notes.
Yes, we'll put all the websites in the show notes. And then there's also this great blog called Mommunizations, and it's from the perspective of moms. Yeah, so doctors do guest write-ups on that blog, but it's mostly moms running it and talking about why they vaccinate and why they are sure that they've made the right decision, and talking about how to get their kids through vaccinations with like the least side effects. And it's just this very loving and supportive space for immunizing moms to talk to other moms. So I love that blog, and I've guest written for that blog a couple of times.
That's great. So I hope everyone can take this news and information. You gave a lot of advice even for physicians. And I would say for parents, as I am a parent, is think back, for those that are Gen X or millennials, think back to your childhood. And I'm sure we had the good times and the bad times, but think back to the good times and the things you didn't even know that were happening, right? You didn't know about measles. You didn't know about rubella. And you were afforded that because our parents immunized us. So just think about that and think about the times where you were afforded that. And can you afford that to your children? The same thing that Dr. Atoosa said about the parent that's like, I want to try it out first. Well, do you want to try out measles first? Do you want to try out rubella first? Well, we didn't have to. So think about that in your critical thinking skills. Our children are using them. Let's use our critical thinking skills. Any final thoughts, Dr. Atoosa? This was really enriching.
Yeah, well, one of the main things I was going to say is if there's any time to overcome vaccine hesitancy, it's now. And that is because the infrastructure of vaccine access is being threatened by the changes that are happening at the national level, the immunization committee being replaced by non-experts, the immunization schedule being reevaluated. And not to be alarmist, but I don't know how much longer we're going to have access, insurance covered or free in the cases of people who have Medicaid, Medicare, CHIP, or are uninsured. Free access to vaccination might not be a forever right or a forever privilege. And the privilege to be able to access vaccines is huge in this country right now. And there are parts of the world that people walk 5 hours on foot in a desert to vaccinate their child.
Repeat that, Dr. Atoosa, because it is so, when we think globally.
In West Africa and Southern Africa, where people literally put their baby on their back and walk 5 hours to a vaccination site to get vaccines for their child. And they do not take the access to vaccination for granted. And there's a wonderful thing that the Immunization Partnership does called a shot of prevention. And that is that every dollar that is made from vaccines, those who are participating in shot of prevention, which a lot of vaccine manufacturers are, every dollar that is made from a vaccine, a dollar is given to vaccine access overseas. So it's almost like vaccinating your child helps you give a mom somewhere in West Africa or South America access to a vaccine for her child. So I think that's also really huge, and goes so far to understand that. And when I heard about that tool and that program, it just warmed my heart. And I also realized that I should not take vaccine access for granted. And now I am telling my immunocompromised patients, those who depend on vaccinations for life-saving prevention, as well as all of my families, make the decision now to vaccinate, because I don't know how much longer we'll have access to these life-saving vaccines. So do it now. Don't wait. Don't say next year, because I don't know what next year will be like. So vaccinate now. That's my final thought.
And just to touch on what you said about the global vaccine access, is that RFK Jr. is pulling the funding from the global vaccine group, Gavi. So do know also our hesitancy here and our beliefs here are permeating worldwide.
Yeah, they're impacting people overseas who really want these vaccines. They want them so bad.
Yeah, very sad.
Thank you, Dr. Keisha, for hosting this and for letting me talk about this cause that's very near and dear to my heart, and that is to cover everyone with all the vaccines that are indicated for them.
Yes. And everybody, please look at the show notes. If you have questions, you can reach out to the Medical Collective on all platforms and our website, which will be up and running very, very soon. And Dr. Atoosa, all of her information will be in the show notes as well. So stay tuned for the next episode. And don't forget, look at the vaccine preventable illnesses episode as well. All right, take care.
Bye.
Thank you for tuning in to the Medical Collective. We hope today's episode has left you with valuable insights and a new perspective on healthcare. Don't forget, follow us on social media for more updates and behind-the-scenes content. I'm Dr. Keisha Davis, and it's been a pleasure to share this time with you. Stay healthy, stay informed, and we'll see you in the next episode, where medicine continues to meet real life. Please note that the content provided in the Medical Collective podcast, including text, graphics, images, and other material, is for informational purposes only. The content is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice of your physician or other qualified health provider with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition. The views and opinions expressed on this podcast are solely those of the individual authors and guests and do not represent those of the Medical Collective, its staff, and any affiliated entities. The appearance of content on the podcast does not imply an endorsement. Neither the host, Dr. Keisha Davis, the co-host, or any guest of the podcast bear responsibility for the accuracy of the content provided or the use of information received through the podcast. Reliance on any information provided by the Medical Collective podcast, its employees, writers, or guests is solely at your own risk.